So this second video, we'll continue our exploration of some of the most important and foundational vector-based tools by jumping into the concepts of intersect and union as tools. So intersect and union are definitely two of the most critical tools in ARC. In my experience, people tend to get a little stressed out and confused by them because of what the output looks like. And so I'm going to try to take some time to really walk you guys through why the outputs look the way they do, so that you can kind of get past that initial hurdle. Because once you do, they're extremely useful tools for taking multiple geographic shapes, overlaying them, and then returning something totally new about the environment that you couldn't analyze individually. It's really one of those kind of first excellent tools where you can kind of see where 15 different boundaries overlap exactly, or where you can bring things together, like roads or railroads, and bring back a layer of points everywhere they cross. Or in the even more powerful union, bring those same 20 boundaries together, but instead of reporting just the area where they all overlap, actually showing all of the unique areas where there's overlap. Great tools rooted in geometric laws, right? The laws of intersect and the laws of union. And so why don't we just dive into them right now so that we can gain our understanding. So I created a new map here. Again, like before, I'm going to call it intersect and union. I dragged in a bunch of boundaries here. For context, unfortunately, because we had to make this class remote, we didn't get a chance to do this together. But in previous iterations of this course, I asked students to go to Google, or ARC Online before class and draw their boundaries about what they think Center City looks like, or what they think East Falls looks like. And that's what you're actually seeing right here, is just an immense amount of disagreement over what Center City looks like. It's from a previous year. This is 6 different people's interpretation of the Center City boundary. Further evidence of that concept that neighborhoods aren't really true administrative boundaries. They're often things that are perceived by people that live in different areas. So I'm going to use this to demonstrate the intersect tool first. You could find it here. It's also under Tools, Analysis, Overlay, Intersect. So the purpose of intersect is to bring back a shape that represents the area where all of your inputs overlap. So it's only going to return in those instances where there is complete overlap. So if you ever had shapes you were bringing in, like let's pretend I had a circle up here and a circle down here, nothing would ever come back to me in intersect because they don't actually touch one another. Intersect will look at all 6 of these and bring back the perfect overlapping shape. So in Pro, you'd set it up like this. Doesn't really matter the order. The order you put them in is just how they're going to look in the attribute table. And if you don't like the way that you sort of entered the data, you can always go to the ranks here and rank them differently. Sorry. Lost myself there for a moment, began whistling. All right, so I've got the 6 neighborhood boundaries. I'll just, maybe call this one intersect 1. For now, I'll leave it as all attributes because I want to show you what the output looks like, but we're going to start playing around with this in a moment because I think this is one of the ways, by moving away from all attributes, that this tool becomes a little bit easier for people to wrap their heads around. And it's not really intersect that is the one that gives people trouble. It tends to be union. So it's going to be more important when we get there. The XY tolerance is going to also be a little more important for union. But XY tolerance is just something that helps with like this kind of nonsense. So, like these boundaries aren't at all perfectly drawn, but like there's probably a good chance that the person who drew this didn't really mean for it to go into the water. They probably wanted it to be like right at the land's edge right here, but they did. So an XY tolerance, if I put like 200 feet or 300 feet, it would treat it as if like anything that was within 200 feet of each other and is overlapping would be considered an overlap. So it just sort of helps obviate those instances where things should line up, but they don't line up perfectly. For now, keep it as same as input. This is only going to be really valuable when we start intersecting lines to see kind of where the points of intersection are. So run it, it'll do its thing. Comes back in this kind of color. Let's change it to a nice red so it's easy to see. And there you go. What it has brought back to me is the unique shape that is the best possible representation of where all 6 of these things overlap. This is the only area where all 6 of them happen to kind of find shared intersection. The attribute table, like I said, is a bit of a mess. But if we pause, we can kind of see what it's bringing together. It's essentially just taking, like if I open Center City Student 1 and Center City Student 2, just so you can see what the boundaries look like. Right, Center City Student 1 has a field called Name ID and a Num ID 1, and it has a shape area and a shape length. Same thing with this field. And if I go to the intersect, I can see that's what's coming back, right? Look, in the name ID field, there's CC Student 1, the number 1, and the appropriate shape and the length. There's CC Student 2, right? The number and the appropriate shape and the length. So it almost just like literally takes everybody's attributes and smashes them. It doesn't recalculate, right? It's not like it recalculated all of the shape areas for what this actual shape is. It literally just brought over whatever data happened to be kind of smashed into the previous one. So this is one of the reasons, and again, this will be far more valuable when we get to Union. But I'm going to just change it up real quick. I'm going to call it Union or Intersect 2. And the only thing I'm going to change is the all attributes to just the feature IDs. Sometimes people run this, right? And the reason they do is because what returns to you in the attributes now is literally just like a FID for the Center City Student 1, for Center City Student 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It almost just returns to you a quick flag that's basically like, hey, I'm here. I have a value of 1. You got me. I'm here. I'm part of the equation here. That's essentially what that does. And when we run to Union in a second, it's going to become a little bit more obvious. But before we get to Union, I do want to demonstrate, one thing, which is the another way to run this, right? So if I kind of, remove these somehow, how do I remove them? I'm just going to go back and come into the tool again. And in this time, instead, I drag in the streets, and I drag in let's actually bring in the Center City Students 1. So I'm going to bring in these streets, and I'm going to bring in this. Now, this is really important to look at how my data is actually structured. If I select a road, notice that it's selecting kind of the entirety of the road that shares the same name. Now, I prepared that with a tool called Dissolve that we're going to learn a little later in these videos. But you might actually have road data that is different. Your road data might not be, structured at the like the road name level where anything that shares a name is the same feature. You might have data that actually is like every individual segment, right? Or every individual street is its own vertice. And that's kind of important because if you ran what I'm about to do with data that's structured like that, the output might look a little bit different because there's more vertices. But really what this is going to do is it's actually going to bring back all of the key points where the roads cross into this polygon, right? So it's going to bring back those sort of border areas. And the only way it would work is if I come here and I change it to point as my output type. Right? So I run that. ArcGIS has chosen a difficult to see gray, so let's right click it and maybe make it a nice bright green. And there you go. Like what I've brought back are simply points of intersection. You know, a number of different ones that essentially are like, okay, this is where Benjamin Franklin Road crosses. You know, this is where JFK crosses. This is where Market crosses, right? So it's the same kind of concept, except you're bringing back the point of intersection as actually a point. And the cool thing is you can also do this without another piece of data. I've always found this kind of cool. Like, let's say you wanted to bring back, right, as a point, the area where these two roads intersect. And you could do this with the whole layer itself. I'm just going to do it with two things selected. But if I selected these two roads and I just dragged in the streets layer, it can intersect itself. Right? I could come here and say point and run. And I'll clear again and try to make it, pink kind of works, but maybe a blue to really make it pop a little more. And I'll make it a dark blue. And there it is, right? The actual point of intersection where these two lines cross is what was brought back right here. So that's kind of how intersect can also be used to identify literal points of intersection. So let's then move on to the next one, right? Union. So if intersect preserves only the areas where you overlap. Like imagine right now, take your two index fingers and touch them to one another so that they are perpendicular, right? So they're going to make like an L or an upside down L depending on how you're looking at your fingers. If you ran an intersect, the only thing that would come back is your fingertips, right? The part of your index finger that is touching the other index finger. That would come back and nothing else. If you did a union, however, what you would see is your one finger and your other finger. It would bring back everything and it would show three areas. It would show the part on your right hand that's not touching. It would show the part of your finger on your left hand that's not touching. And then the third area it would show is where your fingers are actually touching. That's union. It creates all of the individual areas of overlap. And it looks like this. Same thing, let's drag in our fields one at a time, or sorry, let's drag in our shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We'll call this Union 1 as our first example. For now, leave it as all attributes. And this is actually a tool that I find it's very helpful to do the XY tolerance, just so we can kind of obviate those incidences where there is that kind of like weird overlap. You know, like like this area, we can sort of take care of that so we don't create our own little weird sliver right here. But you don't have to. You would simply just create kind of more weird areas of overlap. So if I hit run here, it's going to do its thing. And in a moment, what you're going to see is a kind of a macro shape come back that looks like it's everything. Now, to not confuse stuff, I am going to turn off everything below it so I'm not over-selecting. And if I start selecting, what I can see here is I'm beginning to show these odd and interesting shapes. Now, maybe you got this immediately and you're aware of what's going on. If that's not the case, right, a good next step is open the attribute table for the unions. Minimize it if you need to. And start clicking and seeing what's happening, right? So if I click on that and I scroll down, notice what I'm seeing here is, okay, Center City Student 1, Center City Student 3, Center City Student 4, Center City Student 5. I think I must have forgotten 2 here, so my bad. Right, Center City Student 6. Oh, there's 2. But then nothing here, right? There's nothing in that field for Center City Student 2. What Union is doing is it's bringing back everyone's attributes to show you who is involved in the individual overlap. So this unique shape right here is created when Center City Student 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 overlap, but not 2. We could go back to that familiar shape we created originally. Now it looks a little different, right, because we have a slightly higher XY tolerance gap. But notice all of the fields are filled in here, right? This was that area where everybody came back. This was that intersect. I could even go higher and see this kind of little weird shape here, right? That weird shape is where Center City, student 4, and pretty much no one else, right? That's the unique area that's unique to just Center City 4. This one right here is the area that's unique to Center City Student 1, Center City Student 3, and if I keep dragging, no one else. Notice, though, the other cool thing is how it's handling the FID, right, the ID. There's either a 1 or a -1, where a 1 means I overlap and a -1 means I don't. And I often find that is kind of an easier way for some people to wrap their head around this tool. If you don't allow all attributes to return, but instead just do feature IDs, and we'll kind of name this one Union 2, allow the same XY tolerance, run the tool again, same shape comes back, but the difference is it's a little cleaner in the attribute table, and now it's quite literally saying to you, like, Center City Student 1, Student 2, Student 3, Student 4, Student 5, Student 6, right? For each of the kind of 1s here, it simply tells you if it's a -1, it means I don't overlap. If it's a 1, it means I do. And therefore, that area here where everybody has a 1, that's an area where all people overlap. Here's one where there's 1 with a -1, right, which would be the kind of 1 to the 4th here. That one doesn't happen to overlap. That's the difference between only feature IDs and all attributes, is they just sort of kind of clear up what you see in your table right here. Cool thing is, right, I could theoretically add a field if I wanted to. And I could add a field here, and maybe I'll call it, you know, total, let's call it agreement. And I'll give it an alias, total students agreeing on the boundary. Make it an integer, save that field. And, right, the thing there is, like, what if I actually came to the agreement, and what if I just added these fields together, right? Anywhere where there'd be a 1, you know, and then where there'd be sort of like a -1, would only give me like a 6, otherwise would give me like a 5, would give me a 4, would give me a 3, would give me a 2, would give me a 1. And you could kind of bring them together in such a way that you have a new field that would show you the total number of students that actually agree on an area, right, is kind of another cool way to do this. And you could create something from nothing in your data. So that's Union, that's Intersect. They don't look any different here, right? Except it's more of a drag and drop. You can kind of bring yourself in if you want. You can do it like this, however you want. Same thing, save it. Hey, do you want all the attributes, or do you just want your FID? Hey, do you want to look like the input, or do you want to output yourself as a point? Totally the same. And same thing with Union, right? It looks slightly different, but it's asking for everything identical. The tool is not different, just the way it looks.